Hello and welcome to the Biological Anthropology lecture series. I'm Dr. Richard Jonathan O. Tadurin. Here we explore what it means to be human, biologically, evolutionarily, and behaviorally. Let's begin our journey into the science of humanity. Welcome to Module 10, The Origins of Modern Humans. In this module, we examine how Homo sapiens emerged, interacted with archaic humans, and spread across the globe. In earlier modules, we traced the rise of the genus Homo, from its small-bodied, stone tool-using beginnings to the global wanderer that Homo erectus became. Now we arrive at a turning point, the appearance of beings who look and behave recognizably like us. In this section, we trace the global dispersal of modern humans into Australia, the Pacific, and the Americas. Let's revisit what we already know. Modern humans originated in Africa, but they didn't stay there. Eventually, populations began moving outward, following pathways shaped by shifting climates, available resources, and the presence or absence of other hominins. These dispersals weren't the result of a single grand migration. Instead, they unfolded in waves, sometimes advancing, sometimes retreating, as environments changed. Let's look at the main routes scholars highlight. One pathway moved through the Levant, where early modern humans appeared as early as 120,000 to 90,000 years ago at sites like Sahul and Kafse. These early expansions may not have been permanent, but they show that Africa and Southwest Asia were connected by ecological corridors that opened and closed with climatic cycles. You might wonder why this matters. It tells us that dispersal wasn't simply a matter of geography. It depended on rainfall patterns, vegetation shifts, and even the movement of animals that humans followed for food. A second major pathway leads along the southern fringe of Arabia and into coastal regions of South Asia. This coastal route would have allowed humans to move relatively quickly, using marine resources and following coastlines that were sometimes much lower than they are today due to glacial sea level changes. These early travelers could have reached India and even Southeast Asia long before humans entered Europe in larger numbers. As modern humans moved along these routes, they encountered other hominins, including Neanderthals and later Denisovans. Genetic evidence shows that interbreeding occurred, leaving traces still visible in many populations today. So when we think about dispersal pathways out of Africa, we're really thinking about a series of opportunities created by climate, biology, and human adaptability. These routes set the stage for the later expansions into Australia, the Pacific, and the Americas, journeys that would eventually make Homo sapiens a truly global species. Let's revisit where modern humans were before they reached Australia and the Pacific. After dispersing out of Africa and moving through South Asia, some populations continued eastward, eventually encountering one of the most difficult geographic barriers any early humans had ever faced: open water. Unlike the spread into Eurasia, reaching Australia required intentional crossings, even when sea levels were lower during the Pleistocene. This tells us right away that these early travelers possessed not just physical adaptability, but remarkable technological and cognitive abilities. Let's look at what this journey may have involved. Reaching Sahul, the combined landmass of Australia, New Guinea, and Tasmania during periods of low sea level, meant navigating across Wallacea, a chain of islands that never formed a continuous land bridge. Even at the lowest sea levels, at least a few significant water gaps remained. You might wonder why this matters. It suggests that these early groups didn't arrive by accident. They planned, coordinated, and built watercraft capable of carrying people, tools, and probably food across distances that required foresight and cooperation. Once humans arrived in Sahul, they adapted quickly to its diverse and often challenging environments. Australia presented ecosystems that were entirely new: megafauna species, unfamiliar vegetation, and climatic variability. Yet archaeological sites such as Lake Mungo, dating to around 40,000 years ago, show that humans established themselves relatively quickly. These remains, along with the later finds from co-swamp, highlight both continuity and variation within ancient Australian populations. As humans settled across Sahul, they developed cultural traditions and technologies that reflected deep knowledge of local landscapes. Over time, populations diversified, spreading into New Guinea and eventually into broader Pacific regions through later migrations. While the earliest movement into Sahul represents one wave of dispersal, the settlement of remote Oceania came much later, involving different populations and more advanced seafaring traditions. Think about what this entire process tells us about human evolution. The peopling of Australia and the Pacific was not simply a matter of geography, it was a profound demonstration of innovation, adaptability, and social organization. These early navigators expanded the human world far beyond continental boundaries, marking one of the earliest examples of large-scale maritime exploration in our species' history. By understanding how humans reached Australia and the Pacific, we gain insight into the ingenuity and resilience that allowed Homo sapiens to thrive in every corner of the planet. Let's revisit the global picture before humans entered the Americas. By the late Pleistocene, modern humans had already spread across Africa, Eurasia, and into Australia. The last major regions still uninhabited were North and South America. To reach them, humans had to move through Beringia, a vast landmass that once connected Siberia and Alaska during periods of lower sea level, but simply having a land bridge doesn't tell the full story. Climate, ecology, and timing all shaped how and when people could travel into the Americas. Let's look at that landscape more closely. During the height of the last ice age, much of northern North America was covered by massive glaciers. Even though Beringia provided a connection, the interior of the continent was largely blocked by ice sheets. This is why the idea of a single ice-free corridor became so central for early explanations. But newer evidence suggests that this corridor may not have been biologically viable until after humans were already present south of the ice sheets. That means people may have taken an alternative route, likely along the Pacific coast. You might wonder why a coastal route makes sense. Imagine following shorelines rich with marine resources, using boats or simple watercraft, and moving gradually southward. Archaeological and genetic evidence increasingly supports this view, pointing to humans in the Americas by at least 15,500 years ago and possibly earlier. Once in the Americas, populations spread rapidly. The archaeological record shows humans occupying a wide range of environments, from the tundra of the far north to the deserts, forests, and grasslands farther south. Sites associated with what was once thought of as Clovis culture appear around 13,000 years ago, but earlier sites demonstrate that humans were already established across large areas before Clovis technology emerged. Genetic evidence adds another layer to this story. Most indigenous peoples of the Americas share ancestry that traces back to Siberian populations, with distinct mitochondrial DNA lineages, haplogroups A through D, supporting a small founding population that expanded and diversified across two continents. So when we talk about the peopling of the Americas, we're not just describing a migration, we're describing a remarkable journey into entirely new ecological worlds. These early settlers adapted to diverse climates, invented new technologies, and created cultural traditions that would eventually form the foundation of thousands of indigenous societies. Understanding this process helps us appreciate how quickly and creatively humans can adapt, and how global our species had become by the end of the Pleistocene. Let's revisit what happens when a small group of humans enters a new region. As populations expand into unfamiliar environments, they don't just spread geographically, they begin to diverge genetically and culturally. This process creates what we call population structure. Think about it as the subtle branching of lineages, shaped by distance, climate, and the choices people make about where to live and whom to marry. Let's look at how this plays out in real landscapes. When early modern humans moved into the Arctic, high mountains, tropical forests, or high-altitude plateaus, each environment presented different challenges. These challenges changed the kinds of adaptations that were most advantageous. In cold regions, metabolic and physiological traits that helped conserve heat became important. In high-altitude regions, traits that improved oxygen uptake were favored. Some of these adaptations arose through natural selection within populations, while others were inherited through admixture with local archaic groups, as we saw in the case of Denisovan contributions to Tibetan high-altitude adaptation. Isolation also played a role. Founder effects and genetic drift shaped small, newly settled populations, amplifying certain traits simply by chance. Over generations, these differences accumulated, giving rise to patterns of human variation that we still see today. So when we think about regional adaptations, we're really looking at the intersection of biology, environment, and history. Human diversity isn't the result of separate origins, but of one species exploring every corner of the planet and adapting, both genetically and culturally, to make each region home. Let's revisit the major movements we explored in this section. We followed early modern humans as they crossed water gaps into Australia, navigated complex island chains in the Pacific, and journeyed into the vast landscapes of the Americas. Each of these migrations required different kinds of knowledge, technologies, and social coordination. And importantly, each migration opened the door to new forms of adaptation, biological, cultural, and behavioral. Let's look at what ties these stories together. Whether navigating coastlines, climbing into high-altitude regions, or settling in dense forests, human groups brought with them a remarkable ability to adjust to new environments. You might wonder why this matters. It shows that dispersal wasn't simply about moving from one place to another. It was about transforming landscapes into livable worlds through innovation and cooperation. As populations spread, they didn't all remain connected. Small groups became isolated, drift shaped their genetic profiles, and natural selection favored traits suited to local conditions. Over thousands of years, these processes produced the rich tapestry of human variation we see today. Variation rooted not in separate origins, but in shared ancestry expressed through different ecological challenges. So as we close this section, keep in mind that the global dispersal of Homo sapiens is more than a map of migrations. It's a story of resilience, creativity, and adaptation. Understanding these journeys helps us appreciate not only where people went, but how each region shaped the humans who settled there, and how, together, these paths formed the global species we are today. Now, let's revisit the journey we took through this module. We began by examining what makes Homo sapiens anatomically and behaviorally modern, how a rounded skull, a lighter face, and symbolic technologies set our species on a different evolutionary path. Then, we stepped back to explore the major models of our origins, looking at how fossils and, later, ancient DNA reshaped our understanding. You might wonder why these competing models matter. They show us that science is a conversation, one that becomes clearer as new evidence comes to light. Let's look at what the most recent data reveal. Modern humans emerged in Africa, but their story didn't end there. As they dispersed outward, they encountered Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other regional groups. Instead of a simple replacement, we now see a pattern of interaction, gene flow, shared technologies, and overlapping landscapes. This braided history reminds us that our species evolved in dialogue with others, not in isolation. Now, this part is important. Once humans moved beyond Africa, they adapted to an astonishing range of environments. Whether crossing into Sahul, navigating Pacific islands, or entering the Americas, each migration demanded creativity, resilience, and cooperation. These dispersals didn't just spread people across the globe, they shaped the biological and cultural diversity of human populations today. As we close this module, think about how interconnected these stories are. The origins and dispersal of modern humans form a single narrative about a species capable of innovation, exploration, and adaptation. And in that sense, our deep past continues to shape who we are and how we understand ourselves in the present. Thank you for joining this lecture. I'm Dr. Richard Jonathan O. Tadurin. I hope this session deepened your understanding of biological anthropology. Keep exploring what it means to be human. See you soon.